If you're enjoying the Health Geeks Book Club podcast, we'd appreciate if you hit the subscribe button, leave a like, rating, or review, whichever your preferred podcatcher platform allows.
This episode is sponsored by Well Balanced Nutrition and 360 Health.
Welcome to the Health Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
Hello, everybody. This is Eleanor Russell coming to you from the Podfathers studio.
The Such and Such Media Studios at Liberty Plaza.
And I have my co-host.
Kristen Norton.
With
Well Balanced Nutrition.
That's correct. And I'm with 360 Health. And we're so excited because we're back together and we've been reading over the holidays. And this is our first time in the studio in 2023. So
since last year.
Yeah, it's been a whole year since we've seen Tim.
It's been a whole calendar year.
Yeah, well, we're excited because the book that we're going to be discussing today, and maybe in a few episodes because it's such a meaty read, is called The Gospel of Wellness, Gems, Gurus, Goop, and the False Promise of Self-Care by Rina Raphael. And I will say, you know how I like to tease a bit about the book before we get into the noogies of it. This was published by, a pretty impressive publishing house, a division of Macmillan Publishing Group. It's called Henry Holt Company. This book was published in 2022, so it's like kind of hot off the press.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And so I looked up the Henry Holt Company to see what kind of other books they write or they publish, and they have a 150-year-old tradition of storytellers. So she does tell a story in this book.
Oh, yeah.
So I think even though it's focused in the health and wellness, niche that we like, it also has a good story in it. Now, who is Rina Raphael? She graduated with a degree in journalism from Rutgers. That's a pretty cool place. And her work history, I found this is a gal that has continued her education because she did a whole lot of stints after her education. She did some internships with digital editing and online presses, which I thought were interesting, but like 8-month and 9-month tours of duty. And then she did 7 years with NBC from 2007 to 2014. And then she did a whole series of these 1 year, 3 year, 2 year employments, which I thought was interesting. She didn't stay places, but what I'm thinking happened for her, she stayed long enough to figure out what was going on in these places, and as a journalist, was building her repertoire, I guess. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I worry about people job shifting that fast, that often, but on the other hand, I kind of admire them because they're saying, I'm not staying here, or it's time to move on, and I'm in control.
It could have been a toxic environment. I can tell you stories offline about that.
Absolutely. So, I think we're hoping that we will have Rina Raphael join us sometime in the near future because we would like to talk to her more about her career and her story. But she started out in the New York City. Well, Rutgers is in New Jersey, then New York City, and then she jumps across the continent over to L.A. and spends a whole lot of time in Los Angeles area. I think she has a really good partner in her husband, and she has a whole lot of wonderful support networks that she talks about in her acknowledgments, which I always love to read in a book. Very, very charming group of people, and she's very grateful for them. So I think she's got an interesting world. Okay, so that's who published the book, when it was published, who the author is, should we believe her or not. She is not a scientist. She is a journalist.
And I thought that was a neat thing because a lot of the books we've read are from experts, scientists, people who have a really strong opinion one way or the other. And this is a journalist who's been exposed to the marketing side and as a consumer of it all as well. So
big time consumer.
Yeah. So it's neat to hear just a report of this is how it is. And I think she covered all sides, good and bad, of wellness. And
So it's still research, just research from a professional researcher, not a medical researcher.
Well, but not really. It's more anecdotal self-experience, one person's experience. But then her bibliography, she's got a very in-depth bibliography. And yet again, I was I noticed that there's a few original articles, like from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, but there's also an overwhelming number from what I would call soft press, which makes me, having talked to some of our experts, they say you've got to go to the original and understand the construction of those reports. So what we're finding in these third-party reports that then she accesses and gets a third-party opinion, it's sort of like that grapevine. Is the continuity of the information really maintaining through all those transitions?
But I got the feeling, though, that she called upon experts as she was writing about a particular area, because I recognized quite a few names in the nutrition industry that I'm like, oh yes, that's a good person to talk to. So even though she might not be diving into those research articles, that gave me the thought that, okay, she is looking for experts to advise her in this and educate her a little bit instead of just reading straight from the research.
Yeah, and I think from my time in the medical world, one of the things we were seeking was journalists that could convey what we did to the popular press accurately.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you listen to the experts and you like, and I do that sometimes, and I know you guys out there, oh, by the way, are you in Estonia? Because I think we love Estonia.
Oh, yeah.
And Mongolia.
Mongolia.
Oh, yeah. Keep listening to us, folks.
Yep.
We want to know who you are.
Bulgaria, I think.
Thanks for tuning in.
So if you guys are in there, we really appreciate you listening. We have charted in those countries, and that means that people are listening, which means that we are getting through to somebody.
Yeah.
So that's a plus and a bonus, and thank you all for
Absolutely.
listening.
Thank you. And let's go, America.
Yeah.
Get on board.
Get on board, America.
Yeah, but being able to talk to the popular press about what we do in a clarification, way that people can understand is what we call transferring research into the public, into practice. And that's kind of what we've been experimenting with in this wellness industry. And that's what she's talking about. So on the book cover, there's a thing I would like to read to you guys. It says, balancing the good with the bad, like Kristen just said, the gospel of wellness, this is the book, is a clear-eyed exploration of what wellness can actually offer us, knocking down the false idols and commandments that have taken hold and ultimately showing us how we might shape a better future for the movement and for our well-being. So that's kind of why she was wanting to write this book. And she also was feeling that women are not heard in the world very much. It's a new thing, but women are the most consumers of the wellness products and consumerism, and so we can fall victim to wellness marketing. And what I think she's talking about in this book is not necessarily wellness, but wellness marketing and the consummation or the consumerism side of that. And why are people doing these things?
Yeah, she calls it commodified wellness.
Yes.
Yeah.
What a word.
Jeez. What was that?
That was Stephanie.
So, wellness. What is wellness? Like, this wasn't a thing until here recently. So she calls it out as a movement, and the single most powerful consumer force of 2021. Never before have we seen this level of focus on self-improvement, with U.S. millennials labeled the most health-conscious generation. We have become a self-care nation, though arguably one that still lacks the fundamentals of well-being.
Oh, yeah.
So that kind of opens up the tale that, we're obsessed with wellness. It's a movement, and maybe because it's been commodified, we've sometimes been drawn down the wrong path.
Perhaps so. And I think the one of the stimuluses for this is because modern life is so chaotic. Too much of it feels out of control. And so she's thinking about, we have a poorly constructed medical system that hasn't really met our needs. There's tech overload that we're just bombarded with all the time. There's this tumultuous news cycle that causes fear and, anxiety. And then we have found ourselves somewhat isolated, and we have a lack of community, particularly coming out of the pandemic. And since this book was written in 2022, she has incorporated some of that experience,
right,
which I think is where we find ourselves right now. But Kristen, when we talk about wellness, because you and I are both in this industry, and we like being in this industry, and I found this book a little discomforting because I was challenged to really reflect on motivation and what we are doing as a collective in this industry, because it has popped up for these good reasons. There's a need for feeling good,
right?
And I've found a lot of questions coming up for me as I went through this. So those of you that are thinking about reading this book, I do recommend it. It wasn't a comfortable read for me, as Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart wasn't. I found myself going with this author, and I wanted her here. And I always say, when I have that kind of a reaction, there's something I need to work through. There's something this author is causing me to confront that's good, but it doesn't feel good.
Well, I felt the same. And, I think we're in this business to help others.
Yes.
And it can be easy to get swept up with marketing. So, for instance, a lot of dietitians, we're not taught marketing. And so if we're going to go get our names out there, we dabble in this marketing thing, and we're like, oh, that kind of comes across the wrong way,
And that's a head game, I think, for us, because teachers sell something. They're paid for what they do. Doctors and lawyers are paid for what they do. Everybody, we're in an economy. So because we want to do something good, we should be remunerated for our time so that, we can support families and do that sort of thing. But we want to feel good about what we're actually doing.
Right. And I'm not saying that marketing is bad.
But I think we are kind of programmed in the service industry to kind of push off advertising. For so long, medical people and lawyers did not advertise. It was a ethical no-no. But now they do it all the time because they have to.
Right. And that's what I think that, for me, what was uncomfortable is I don't want to stop marketing myself because I want to continue to help people, but I want to be really careful about not overpromising anything, or, not getting swept away with seeing what these big wellness companies do and over-promising, over-glorifying things without showing the real side of things.
Yeah. Well, I think in the book she talks about how we have kind of lost the faith in the medical community, which I don't think is actually true, but we talk about that a lot in wellness. The thing is, what she suggests is physicians are sometimes treating symptoms rather than the root causes, and she cautions the wellness industry not to fall into that same trap, by treating symptoms. And so much of what she talks about, I kept thinking, Rina, why are you going to those gyms and doing that stuff? And why are you putting those electrodes on your body while you work out? And, maybe she was doing the investigation.
Well, I think that was part of her job to a certain extent.
Yeah, but then she said, I did this because I wanted to. I bought the story. That I need to be beautiful, I need to be working out, I need to be sweating, I need to be the ideal woman, Mm-hmm. And she ran in a pretty celeb crowd, from what I could tell, as she didn't seem like she was down here in the under.
Yeah, that definitely shines through in the story she tells, and it's like, ooh, I feel like I'm listening to the gossip of the cool kids right now, because this doesn't really relate to me on my level, but it was fun to read about that.
Yeah, and I kind of hurt for her because she felt compelled to do that, because I think that this whole eating disorder epidemic it's doubled since 2000 to 2018, the number of eating disorders, I believe. You may know the stats better. And just body imaging, those kinds of ideas of and we're talking about women mostly primarily, but it does spill over into men as well.
Yeah, I think I'd love to have her on. Hopefully we can ask her these questions, but I feel like maybe she was interested in that kind of thing, and then that's where her career went, into that lifestyle content for the Today Show, and then she got swept away in all of that wellness culture and beliefs, and, you know, being in New York in that kind of business, and then in LA, those are...
And this market was going to the $1 trillion markets, you know. I mean, the projections were there in 2000. Wellness is going to be the next growth industry in the United States for sure, probably globally as well. And so being a journalist, that would be a great place to be. You know, there'd be a lot of content to talk about. So I appreciate that as well. She made a good choice to be there. And her things have been in... she wrote for the Fast Company and CBS, and maybe some of you have read some of her things. She has a great blog that's out there, a monthly newsletter. So you can go read. If you don't want to read the book, you can maybe check those resources out as well. But, you know, the other thing that I think came home to me with this was how our culture is tending towards self-absorption and how we're focused inwardly and feeling that we have to spend a lot of time on ourselves.
Well, it's this whole self-care movement.
Exactly.
Too. Like, she, in one of her articles, she writes about how teenage girls are internalizing the self-care message from social media, and they're feeling stressed about feeling stressed.
Yeah. God.
Isn't that sad?
This is awful. It's the snake eating the tail, or whatever, however that goes.
They're like, I've got all these things on my schedule, and I don't have time to unwind with a bubble bath. And
I feel guilty about that. I need it. I need a bath.
It's terrible.
I can't fit it all in. I've been down that road where, you know, okay, you're supposed to brush your teeth, you're supposed to meditate, you're supposed to exercise, you're supposed to, you know, eat clean. But, I mean, all of a sudden, you don't have any time left.
Well, and I think that's a very important point that she brings up early on in the book. And you mentioned that, you know, women are the ones who are seduced the most by wellness, because we're living in this chaotic world where, you know, we're working, but we're also expected to feed our family organic, nutritious meals. We're expected to maintain a certain body size and shape, and, you know, also bring home all the bacon. And how are we supposed to do all that?
We heard you, Tim.
So those issues are real, and the marketers are selling solutions to these problems that really wellness can't fix.
Deliver.
Yeah. That's the whole Band-Aid thing where, you know.
The symptom.
Rather
than the root cause. So what is wellness? Because we talk about health and wellness. And, you know, I teased that around. I was thinking, okay, I'm reading this book, and we're throwing these words around. And so maybe health is physical well-being. You know, your body works like you move it and do it and think and or have function. And then maybe the mental and spiritual and physical connection is more of what we're talking about in wellness, where you feel good. And maybe it's not your blood markers, but how do you feel? I'm not sure. And then how happy are you? You know, we have some countries have happiness indexes that they're looking at.
Well, that's the problem, right? There isn't any one definition of wellness. And she brings that up, I think, that so commodified wellness then just pressures you to always do more, be better, be optimized. And I think for us, kind of as wellness practitioners, so to speak, we just want to help people feel better. We want to help them live a life that they can feel good about.
Yes, yeah. That go out and do the things that make you who you are.
Yeah.
And to be able to do that. And if you don't feel good, you're likely to sit and isolate, I think. And we heard Michael Rolls in one of our books, Turning Pain into Love, where he was talking about when you're suffering with chronic pain, you do isolate because you don't want to be the downer in the group. You don't want to be the one complaining all the time. Or you are that person and everybody avoids you. You know, it's like, I don't want to be around you.
Yeah.
Well, I think are we got our mark here, Tim?
20 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, but real quick, before we wrap up, I wanted to pull one more wellness definition that you and I often call out, and that's the 7 dimensions of wellness. And that's what I was taught in my marketing, or in my marketing in my master's program. So yeah, and that takes into consideration physical, spiritual, occupational, environmental, all of those things. So I think from our perspective, we've got a good idea of wellness, but the trouble is that's not universal.
Yeah, and I didn't hear her really taking much issue with that kind of constellation of wellness that we talk about. So I think what we can do in our next episodes, because we knew that we would want to talk about this more than one episode, is we're going to dive into some of the history of how this movement came along, and then maybe focus in on some specific topics that she talked about that interested us, like nutrition and fitness and worshiping.
Spirituality.
Yeah. So stay tuned and we'll do some more. I'm Eleanor Russell of 360 Health. We make healthy happen. And if you want to talk about any of these ideas or read some books with us, please reach out to me at 360health4u.com.
And I'm Kristen Norton with Well Balanced Nutrition. We are registered dietitians helping you have a healthy relationship with food by improving your lifestyle and dietary habits. Visit us at wellbalancednutrition.com.
Views and opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the express written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.